Good evening, I'm Katerina Georgieva. This is CBC Windsor News. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, an update on the latest homicide in Windsor. Police are asking for the public for help. Plus, a push for change at the WFCU after the death of a pickleball player. And a Trump rally over the weekend featured a comedian making racial jokes. It has sparked outrage, and we will hear from local comedians about what they make of it. But first, big rigs are a common sight on the Ambassador Bridge, and it's the easiest access point for companies trying to ship loads between Windsor and Detroit. One American trucker says recently lifted restrictions just made his job a lot safer. As Chris Ensing explains, it's a change that takes effect today.
Trucks are now carrying new types of hazardous materials across the Ambassador Bridge and into Canada. Transport trailers full of flammable liquids and corrosive materials driving across a 95-year-old bridge raises the question, what kind of risks are there? Michigan's Department of Transportation started studying this in 2021 before lifting these restrictions. Hazardous materials like flammable gas, spontaneously combustible, and toxic materials have been cleared to cross the Ambassador Bridge for more than a decade. These new materials could use a ferry that crossed the Detroit River, but it was shut down last year. That was a massive change for drivers like Brian Wilkins, who hauls Class 3 flammable liquids between Windsor and Detroit.
Now, instead of us driving 30 minutes to deliver a load, now we're having to drive all the way up to Port Huron, which is 2.5 hours through farmlands, back roads, and whatever to the Port Huron Bridge, and then another hour and a half back down. So, you're talking about a 30-minute trip, which is right here. And now we're doing 5.5 hours.
Now that the restrictions are lifted on the Ambassador Bridge, he's back to quick trips.
It's so stress relieving because now, especially right before the winter, like I can sit here all day and tell you the horror stories I have taking those back roads trying to get to Port Huron when it's snowing like crazy, the roads are icy, and behind me have 30,000 pounds of the most wicked stuff you can think about.
There are still restrictions. The bridge won't let him cross if they think he'll be stuck in traffic above the river, and each crossing requires an escort from Ambassador Bridge staff. When he gets into Canada, he's using the same roads he did with the ferry and similar to the route he took when using the Blue Water Bridge. This change, you taking your truck across the Ambassador Bridge, do you think it makes anybody less safe?
Absolutely not.
American safety officials did highlight one concern that Wilkins shares. The Ambassador Bridge doesn't have a fire suppression system that will put out a fire that involves a truck carrying Class 3 flammable liquids. That requires a specific type of foam that would need to come from nearby fire departments. Windsor doesn't want this. Council says they can't do anything about it, so they've asked the federal government to step up. The feds say this isn't their jurisdiction, it's a provincial matter. The province, through a spokesperson, says no, it's not. We don't provide regulatory oversight over a private company like the Ambassador Bridge. That's left everybody pointing fingers at each other while new types of hazardous materials start driving across North America's busiest international crossing. Chris Ensing, CBC News, Windsor.
We're learning more about Windsor's most recent homicide after a 69-year-old man was killed last week. He was found in his home with a fatal head injury. Police are asking the public directly for tips as they search for two suspects and try to understand why this happened. They say it's a tragic situation.
We don't have a motive right now, so that's what we're trying to determine at this point. There is evidence of something happening. Again, we don't know if it was a struggle, but there was some damage inside the house.
In the security footage, police have released two men walk by the home on Highland Avenue multiple times, and one of the suspects looks like he knew where security cameras were at the home. Investigators believe this is an isolated incident, and nothing appears to have been stolen and no signs of forced entry. Investigators are still determining if a weapon was involved. The case has been complicated by the neighborhood being busy with vehicles and pedestrians at the time of the incident on October 25th. Police say it happened between 6:30 and 7:30 a.m. that day. Police have identified the man who died as Reginald John Fricke, and they say that it was his wife who found him and called 911. Where is the line between comedy and politics? The age-old question is a hot topic again after a comedian made racial jokes at a Donald Trump rally last Sunday. Dawson Chen asked some experienced Windsor stand-up comics for their reactions.
You know, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
That was just one of the controversial things that comedian Tony Hinchcliffe said at a rally for Donald Trump in New York City on Sunday. Along with trashing Puerto Ricans, he made jokes playing up stereotypes about Latinos, black people, and Jews. Kamala Harris's campaign quickly condemned the remarks, with vice presidential candidate Tim Walz pointing out that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. But Hinchcliffe defended himself on social media, saying his jokes are being taken out of context and that he's a comedian. It's a position that drew complex responses from Windsor stand-up comics.
It's definitely controversial. As soon as you start bringing comedy into politics, it's going to offend people for sure. While my political leanings might not be the same as his, I do feel like that was a performance, it was a gig. He's a roast comedian, so his whole thing is like he says offensive things. I don't think that you can take what they said as a statement. Like, it has to be taken in the context of the entire performance.
It's just a weird thing to be at like a presidential rally and then have it be kind of under the microscope of like speaking for, like, he's basically speaking for the Republican Party, right? At that point, they kind of shouldn't have booked him to do a set of stand-up comedy I just think it was kind of an inappropriate setting for him from the get-go. Like, what is he going to do? Not do his material?
Windsor stand-up comic Mel Lucier, who is part of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, says she knows what it feels like to come under scrutiny for jokes. But her personal philosophy on comedy doesn't involve punching down.
Absolutely racist. Absolutely. He made fun of a whole marginalized minority of people. To me, it just incites hate and violence. I prefer a little bit more of a storytelling and a punchline and things, and not insulting people, not making fun of minorities, because it's not funny.
As for Hinchcliffe's assertion that freedom of speech is under attack.
You know what? Freedom of speech, if it incites hate and violence, it's not freedom then against a marginalized community. I don't believe that's freedom of speech. I don't. And I'm just seeing the freedom of speech is bringing out hatred in a lot of people.
Dawson Chen, CBC News, Windsor.
The WFCU Center is a popular spot for pickleball, but the local pickleball club wants changes to the court, including asking the city to install padding on a wall at the indoor court. The request comes after the death of a pickleball player last June. Dale Molnar has more.
He would have fallen and probably hit his head in this area in here on the wall.
Windsor Pickleball Club President Patrick Brown points out the area on this wall at the WFCU gym where a man hit his head last June. He later died. The club is asking the city to install padding on the wall to prevent future injuries and deaths. The club members such as Tracy Heslop, Norm Bisson, and Corey Gattrell all agree. Bisson also knew the man who died both on and off the court.
I think you've got to take some extra precautions with the elderly people that are playing.
I think it's a great idea. There's been multiple people that have fallen and hit their heads against the wall already, including some that have had to go to hospital, and even worse, an actual death.
Like when you're going for a lob shot, you're kind of coming backwards, and you lose your momentum and you'll fall backwards into the wall.
The club is not sure of the cost, but Jen Knights, the executive director of Recreation and Culture, says they are looking into it.
We have been working with risk management, looking at padding options for the WFCU Center Gymnasium as well as our other facilities. Normally, if we were looking at doing something at one facility from a risk management lens, we would look at doing it at all of them.
Meanwhile, the club is also asking the city for new nets that are more sturdy and a rollout floor that is less reflective and easier to play on.
We are pleased with the City Council hearing our request and giving consideration to our proposal. I think the one thing that Council probably misunderstood is that the Windsor Pickleball Club is willing to pay for the equipment. We're not looking to the city to contribute any money other than to give us a bit of a break on our rental.
Brown says the nets and the flooring would cost about $40,000. They can already cover the $9,000 cost of new nets, but would fundraise the rest. They do want the city to pay for the padding.
City Council has voted to look into the funding of the padding at budget time. Dale Molnar, CBC News, Windsor.
The documentary Pray follows a survivor of sexual abuse by a priest in southwestern Ontario. And 5 years ago, when former Windsor resident Chris McLean sat down to watch the documentary, it changed his life. CBC host Amy Dodge met with McLean and has his story.
He does, yeah. Is that your first sexual experience? Yes. Okay. And does this carry on over the grade 9 year? It does, yeah. At what frequency?
This is Ron McLeod, and he's talking about the abuse that he endured from Father Rod Marshall. Now, when Chris McLean was watching this documentary in a theater in Toronto, it completely changed his life.
Watching what Rod McLeod went through was instrumental for me, and I said, I can't live this lie anymore. It's time to share the story. And after the documentary, there was a wine and cheese sort of a gathering, and I talked to the lawyer that's in the documentary, Rob, and I took him aside and I told him what had happened to me. He's the first person I ever told. I'd only known him 10 minutes.
What happened that day?
With Father Nelligan? You know, it's a different era. Windsor in 1979 was a small town. It was weird because I was there with 4 or 5 friends. There was no bells and whistles going off with the potential for abuse. I knew Nelligan quite well from, he wasn't just my parish priest, he was my high school priest, and we were playing cards. There was 4 or 5 of us, and I was the last one to leave, and he asked me to come back in and give him a hand with something. And he said to me, you've had a few drinks, maybe it'd be best if you just stayed. At that point, he took my keys away and he closed the door. And before I even knew it hit me, the lights were dimmed and the whole mood had changed quite quickly. And I didn't even see it coming. It became very draconian, very fast. And when I asked him what was going on, he said, it's really lonely being a priest. And I think that's as far as I can take it with respect to the steps that happened after that, but suffice to say, it wasn't easy leaving, and I had to do a lot of maneuvering to get out of there. And I remember it very fondly now that I'm here, because I haven't looked at the building in a long time, but it's been over 45 years since I've seen this.
Right, your settlement is done. It's all done. How does it feel that it's sort of all done? I know it's gone off to funding, but does that feel like an accomplishment, or do you still feel like there's a lot? No.
Not really. Part of being abused is you don't realize the manifestations of it over a lifetime. You know, I got off the phone and the Zoom call with my lawyer, and the settlement's done, and all I could think of, I wish I had a better relationship with my daughter. And that's all I cared about. The money, it doesn't matter. You can't put a price tag on the dysfunction it caused over a lifetime, and nobody sees it except you. Day to day, I'm a chiropractor, I have 2 clinics. Nobody sees it, but you know it's there.
If you or someone you know has experienced sexual violence, here are some places where you can call for help. A live look outside there. If you're wondering where Colette Kennedy is, not to worry, she's coming up later in the program tonight. But after the break, first, we will have some national news for you. Stay with us. It's official. After weeks of speculation, Premier Doug Ford confirmed that his government will be giving Ontarians $200 each, a move opposition leaders have been quick to call a bribe. Lane Harrison has the latest details and reaction.
Life is expensive right now.
Premier Doug Ford making a statement many Ontarians can relate to while announcing a rebate that will reach nearly everyone in the province. His government will be giving every taxpayer in Ontario a $200 rebate to help with the high cost of living. The $3 billion program has no income-based eligibility, meaning the wealthiest recipients will get as much as the poorest, something Ford defended.
Because they're taxpayers. These are tax dollars going back to the taxpayers. And we're going to give it back to every single person in Ontario. And if they have a child, they're getting an additional $200 because life's too expensive right now.
Taxpayers will receive checks in the mail in early 2025, and Ontarians must file a tax return this year to be eligible. While the checks will go to adults, families who qualify for the Canada Child Benefit will receive an extra $200 per child. The province says the rebate is possible because inflation has driven up sales tax revenue.
The reason that we can do this is because we've got a balanced books that we're projecting, that we've been good fiscal managers, so it's allowed us to have the capacity with a growing economy and revenues, as we highlighted in the public accounts, to be able to do this.
The announcement comes as speculation heats up around an early election call in the province. And while he's kept a tight lid on his plans, the Premier sounded like he was in campaign mode.
Instead of holding on to this money like Bonnie Crombie would, we're putting it back into the pockets of taxpayers. The difference between our party and the Liberals and NDP, they believe in one thing: tax the taxpayers to death.
Back at Queen's Park, the opposition was ready to respond. Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie was adamant there would be no new taxes if she were to become Premier.
Of course, people like a gimmick, but this is their money that is being used to bribe them.
It's not a solution to the affordability crisis. It's not a solution to building the affordable homes that people need. It doesn't help anybody get a family doctor.
When asked if his government was gearing up for an early election, Ford said his team has been putting money back in people's pockets since day one. Lane Harrison, CBC News, Toronto.
CBC Radio-Canada has learned that there's a major rail announcement planned for the coming weeks. The Trudeau government will take steps forward on a high-speed train linking Quebec City and Toronto. Greg Ross has the details.
People waiting to board trains at Union Station this morning were encouraged by the prospect of a new high-speed train.
That sounds fantastic. Would love to be able to get to Montreal in like 3 hours. That'd be crazy.
And that's exactly what sources say the trip between Toronto and Montreal would be. The new proposal is expected to have trains that travel as fast as 300 kilometers per hour, like in other countries that already have them in place. It would be a huge contrast from the amount of time it takes to get from Toronto to Montreal by train now.
Sometimes they say it's going to be 5 hours, but then there are delays and it can be 6, 7 hours.
Stops along this route would include Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City.
It's something we've been waiting for a long time, so I think it is good news indeed.
This professor with Toronto Metropolitan University says it would encourage more domestic travel.
People will be able to see that the next door province is not so far away.
He also says it would almost eliminate the need to fly between Toronto and Montreal.
Flying has become difficult. It takes a lot more time now to go through security, to go through all the problems that we have experienced in the past few years. Planes are delayed frequently. It's not convenient to be stuck in a plane and to be delayed.
Today, the Premier seems skeptical.
We need higher populations. You see, it all works in Tokyo, works in high populated areas, but let's not rule out anything. We'll sit down and see what they have to offer there.
We're projected to swell by 6 million people over the next 20 years in that corridor. So the demands on infrastructure, particularly as it relates to our transportation network and mobility, that's only going to intensify.
The train would need a new electrified track. This lecturer in transportation planning at the University of Montreal says the exact cost of the project is still not entirely clear.
The last discussions, they were at around $120 billion.
Apparently, the numbers are coming up lower than that.
According to sources, the federal government has chosen a winning bidder out of 3 competing consortia. But CBC News was not able to confirm this with a spokesperson for the transport minister. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
When we come back, we'll have Colette with us to tell us all about the weather ahead. Stay with us. Colette Kennedy joins us now for a look at our weather forecast. Colette, absolutely gorgeous today. So beautiful, and a record breaker?
Yes, a record breaker, a new record daytime high for us today. Just some incredible, numbers. Yeah, and you know, I on any given day, Katerina, I'm always trying to figure out what day is it, what's the date, but I'm really like, it's the 29th of October.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I know, right? And these are the kinds of conditions we have. I just want to show you at 6 a.m. this morning, it was 14 degrees in Windsor. Ottawa was at -1, so a 15-degree difference there. And even Toronto just at 3 degrees. And we know from there, we really saw those temperatures jumping up. We actually hit a high of 25 degrees, in fact, just a little bit over. And the old record from 1946, 23.9. So there we go. So this is a look at what the current temperature is. And by the way, are you noticing Chicago? Yeah, Chicago was up to 30 degrees earlier. Again, 29th of October. And these are the normal highs. 12 degrees, a normal low, 4 degrees. So just there you go. Here we are looking at Sarnia 21, Chatham-Kent coming in at 20, London as well, Kitchener 19. And then kind of after that, it's still a little bit cooler. The numbers have been coming up elsewhere in the province, or at least eastward, but it's taking a bit more time there for those winds to shift. And this is what's so important, the southwesterly flow. But these are the sustained winds. And we know it has been blustery through the day today. Right now, we're still seeing those winds gusting over 50 kilometers an hour. And it really doesn't calm down. Often you'll hear me say, oh, tonight the winds will be dropping back a little bit. Not happening. We're still talking about winds gusting times 50, 60 kilometers an hour. A few spots could see even higher than that into tomorrow morning. Now, tomorrow afternoon, it gets a little bit better, but really the next couple of days, we have windy conditions as we're into this kind of the middle of the system. So that rain we had and the thunderstorm activity, that was the warm front. The cold front's trailing behind. That's going to have to go through. But not yet, not yet. We've got another couple of mild days coming our way. I know it's very important that we have to look at what's going to be happening in terms of the rainfall coming in for, yes, Halloween. It looks like into those very important late afternoon or early evening hours, we could have some showers on Thursday. So do be aware of that, but also be aware that for the next couple of days, we definitely have mild conditions that are coming our way, and then we cool down at the end of the week, Katerina.
Thanks so much for that, Colette.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching. That is it for CBC Windsor News. For more, go to our website, cbc.ca/Windsor. Have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.